Our first capstone presentation today will be from Mary Kate Cramer, and her thesis statement is, because humans are made in the image and likeness of the divine creator, communication through art is necessary for the spiritual life. Please welcome Mary Kate.
Take a moment to consider this photorealistic painting. What is your eye drawn to when you first look at it? What colors catch your attention? Again, consider this icon. What is your eye drawn to first, and what colors catch your attention? My eye is first drawn to the little girl in the painting, and the yellow of her jumper especially catches my attention. In the icon, my eye is first drawn to the bright red garment. It has an earthy tone, and that contrasts the cool tones of the green garment and the blue wings, but complements the bright orange of the outer wings. Art is defined as the conscious use of skill and creative imagination, especially in the production of aesthetic objects. Through this conscious use of skill, the artist can communicate truth, beauty, and goodness. Art's importance is derived from its direct and intimate connection to God's nature. God is the divine creator, and he made man in his image and likeness. Because God is the creative being, man is also a creative being. The church has always affirmed the importance of art as a sacred means of communication and education. Because humans are made in the image and likeness of the divine creator, communication through art is necessary for the spiritual life. Communication is a necessary skill for all humans. However, there are many moments when a person struggles to articulate their thoughts in the way that they truly desire. A visual representation of a thought can be absorbed more cohesively as one idea than a verbal representation can. For the purpose of this presentation, verbal communication simply refers to daily dialect. Visual communication is a form of communication that is grounding. It can move past the boundaries of words. This is not to say that visual communication is the only form of utilizing creativity, although it is one of the most prominent ones. There are many ways to be creative, like singing, dancing, or culinary creativity. This creativity allows it to become a supplement to verbal communication that cannot be ignored. To communicate is a desire that has been etched into the human soul. Man's desire to tell stories through art allows him to make beautiful art that communicates genuine beliefs and thoughts through a new lens. For example, the photorealistic piece evokes a feeling of joy. This is why I titled the piece, "Let There Be Light." My aim for this piece was to show an innocent girl who's a light to those around her. Her innocence showcases her goodness. Plato identified three transcendentals: truth, beauty, and goodness. The transcendentals are reflections of God's image in the world. They are especially manifest in the things that man creates. Truth is a mirror of God because he only reveals true things to man. Everything that the church teaches is true, and man desires this truth. Because man wants to discover what is actual, he is pushed to seek reality, and this can be found in good art. Goodness is a mirror of God because, by nature, he cannot be evil. Emotions, thoughts, and ideas separate man from the rest of creation because they stem from his intellect. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says that by his emotions, man intuits the good and suspects evil. This means that man recognizes goodness through his rightly ordered emotions. This is one of the ways in which he draws closer to God, recognizing God in creation through his emotions and intellect. In the same way, creative production that expresses his rightly ordered emotions, thoughts, and perspectives brings him closer to God. Beauty is the transcendental most closely related to creativity. Beauty is defined as being enjoyed as rejoiced in. Art, music, dance, and other forms of creative production are one of the most common ways that a person experiences beauty. God is beautiful, and all the things that he has bestowed upon humanity are likewise beautiful. Meditating on beauty and making beautiful things allows for a special experience between God and a human maker. It reflects the beauty of God that is present within themselves and draws them nearer to God. Because of man's natural vocation, it is not only acceptable but necessary to create. Whenever creative production is pushed aside for the purpose of productivity and efficiency, man is the one who suffers. If he pushes aside creativity, he pushes aside a major avenue for connecting to God. Art is something so powerful that in times of war and oppressive dictatorships, artists are the first to be censored and silenced. Aside from a connection between man and God, creativity also connects people to one another. Man has a desire to communicate and a desire to be creative. These desires overlap and combine to connect man to others and to God. Pope St. John Paul II calls God the essential art and says that man as an artist should aim to communicate that essential art to others. In order for art to be good, it must communicate truth. Since God is truth, art must aim to communicate God. Creative art is a communication of and sharing in the essential art. Just as with verbal communication, part of the process is reception. A person has to listen to the words another is speaking in a conversation before being able to appropriately respond. When creating, the artist must contemplate and carefully decide what elements to include. For example, in the icon that I wrote, the lines of the garment are thin. This was intentionally done in order to create the illusion of cloth through emphasizing the highlights that give shape rather than the highlights that give value rather than the lines that make shapes. Attention and reception are an artist's effort to create lovingly and selflessly. If the artwork is not made lovingly, the artist has not fully entered into the process that unites him to God. Pope St. John Paul II says that man appears in the image of God by exercising creative dominion over creation. This creative power allows the artist to communicate God's wisdom to those around him. The artist draws nearer to God and nearer to others through creating his art, but he can draw others nearer to God when they view his art. Man's ability to take in the world around him and find a deeper meaning is powerful. This perception allows him to better see truth, beauty, and goodness. It allows him to interact with God through art. When writing my icon, Mrs. Littell explained the meanings of each layer written. This allowed me to understand the depth of meaning behind each step that we did. As I wrote, I was better able to contemplate each shape, color, or line, and understand that it has meaning. John of Genoa explained the reason that the church encourages the use of icons. First, for the education of illiterate people. Second, to make the truths of the church more present in everyday life. And third, to excite feelings of devotion. The second reason is especially prevalent today. Most people are educated, so there is a lesser need for this type of education. But icons serve as reminders, which are still needed in order to make faith more present in everyday life. Just as with all other visual art, icons surpass the boundaries of verbal communication. When someone has contemplated an artwork, the truth taught by the artwork becomes part of the beauty present. Icons move people towards conversion because they teach and convey truth. The iconographer himself studies other icons before writing his own, praying and contemplating throughout the entire process. Icons are not the only form of art that convey sacred art that convey truth, beauty, and goodness. The church is steeped in magnificent art, such as the architecture of grand cathedrals, Baroque-style frescoes, or the Pietà. These things point towards God. They allow man to deepen relationship by experiencing the transcendentals. All of these works are a witness to the impact that art has on man. They are a manifestation of creativity that leads to deeper holiness. Simply viewing or listening to art is not enough. Man must create his own art and participate in the creative experience. The Catechism says that, created in the image of God, man also expresses the truth of his relationship with God the Creator by the beauty of his artistic works. Indeed, art is a distinctively human form of expression. Arising from talent given by the Creator and from man's own effort, art is a form of practical wisdom, uniting knowledge and skill to give form to the truth of reality in a language accessible to sight or hearing. To the extent that it is inspired by truth and love of beings, art bears a certain likeness to God's activity in what he has created. Although there are different levels of talent given to different people, every person has the intrinsic ability to create that can be cultivated over time and with practice. It allows for a level of communication that surpasses the limits of speaking. Communicating through creativity is a natural inclination for every person. When the experience of creating an artwork is a prayerful one, the divine artist can pass his wisdom to the human artist. Art is a potent tool that is a gift from God. This gift must be utilized in each person's unique way. It is an important means of deepening one's spiritual life, and its power should not be underestimated. Art has the potential to harmonize the whole. It can bring about unity and increase the intimacy of a relationship between God and man or between people. This is the task of art, to show love through truth, beauty, and goodness. Thank you.
Do we have any faculty questions?
Mr. Alvarado.
Thank you very much, Mary Kate, for both your presentation and your artwork. Where's Unity? No, I'm kidding, I'm kidding. So, I'm interested in your thoughts on the classical view of creativity for artists. In particular, that one can only be creative as a fruit of their own freedom, and the artist can only be free through the discipline of imitation. So I'm wondering how this sense of creativity might compare with a modern sense of creativity as mere self-expression.
Thank you for your question. So as you said, the classical view of creativity is that it must be imitative. And I actually talk about this in my paper. Because God created first, and man is made in the image and likeness of him, all art is going to be imitative. And even though you are making an original piece that no one else has made before, it's still going to be imitative simply because we cannot actually create ex nihilo. And the idea of self-expression obviously is very important because you have a perspective that is unique. And as I said in my conclusion, every person must express creativity in their own unique way, but it is so much more than that. And so they have part of the truth, but not all of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Kate.
Mr. Paoletti.
Thank you, Mary Kate. I'd like to take your principles of beauty and apply them to music, if you permit me. I think you're familiar. You said that art evokes emotion, and emotions are positive, basically movements towards God. towards the spiritual life, correct?
Yes.
Okay, what if somebody says, in applying this to music, perhaps even liturgical music, that if you create music that is emotional, it takes away from a genuine gift or adoration of God. Namely that the adoration, because it brings about positive emotions, the music I should say, brings about positive emotions, it becomes selfish and it's not a true gift to God.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so you are completely right that music is another form of art. Just for the purposes of this presentation, I focused on visual communication because it was something that I could easily communicate to everyone here. But yes, music is 100% a form of art that is very important. And I think specifically with adoration, it is strange because there isn't room for that selfishness that you're talking about. And many times people can fall into the trap of going into adoration knowing that, oh, there will be praise and worship, and like expecting, like, oh, I'm going to feel this very powerful emotion and it's going to be great, I'm going to connect with God, but all of that is centered on self, which is completely contradictory to adoration, where you're focusing on God, you're worshiping God, and you are beholding Him. And so it's really about disciplining yourself and really examining your own conscience and saying, what is my intention whenever I'm going into this adoration? Am I truly trying to worship my Creator, or am I trying to get something out of it for myself?
So just one follow-up. So would that involve more likely negating emotion or embracing emotion?
There are legitimate experiences of emotion in adoration, especially with music, because it naturally evokes emotion, and that's not a bad thing. But if you're grasping for this emotion and you feel unhappy, if you don't get it, you feel like you didn't get something that you were obliged to get and that was owed to you, that becomes a problem. If God chooses to bestow that emotion as a gift on you, it's only appropriate that you receive that in humility.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Ardway.
Thanks, Mary Kate. So considering that your claim is that creativity is necessary for a spiritual life, could you try to reconcile that claim with the truth of a venerated saint, say like a monastic desert father, like Saint Anthony of the Desert, who like clearly had a spiritual life since he's a venerated saint, but maybe, could you just try to reconcile the truth that Saint Anthony of the Desert and the like clearly have a spiritual life, yet they're not necessarily thought of in being creative?
Thank you for your question. So it's very important to examine the definition of art, which is the conscious use of skill and creative imagination, especially in the production of aesthetic objects. And once again, that is not limited to paintings or drawings or even music. And so someone doesn't have to constantly be like walking around with a paintbrush behind their ear to be creative, because there are people who express their creativity through mathematics. I've seen my friends like in calculus class use their creativity to create something beautiful, like come up with this answer that I can't figure out because it's just not my strong point. And so I think separating like painting and drawing and those typically artistic things from actual art and creativity is very important. Thank you. Deacon Conk.
Thank you, Mary Kate. So you mentioned connecting with God through an experience of truth, goodness, and beauty. I was wondering if you could maybe zoom in on icons as a way of communication of grace. So not so much by encountering nature or natural phenomena, but actually the transmission of prayer and the economy of grace. What did you learn about icons that lends art not only to natural benefit, but also supernatural?
Thank you for your question. So icons are a very, very old tradition, and yes, they date back all the way to the early church. And there's something very beautiful about that, and the fact that this specific art style has been passed on for so long. And once again, the three reasons for the use of icons that John of Genoa, who is a really old dude, explained, are first, for the education of illiterate people, second, to make the truth of the church more present in everyday life, and third, to excite feelings of devotion. And so, specifically truth is connected to iconography because all of them are meant to teach something about the church. And this one, is so limited because it's only one. And there are so many. They've been created since the beginning of the church, which was a good while ago. And so there are so many that are teaching truth, and even though they're not in nature, they're still good, and they're teaching the things that the church, God has revealed to the church.
So follow-up, is it possible to write an icon and not pray? I don't mean to trip you up. I just mean, is prayer part of the process in
Prayer?
this economy of grace? Yes.
Okay, prayer is a very important part of the process, specifically for the iconographer. And so, just because, say, an iconographer, for some reason, was writing an icon without praying, there's still potential for God to work through that. And so it is possible to write an icon without praying because you don't know the inner thoughts of every iconographer that's ever existed. And I'm sure that's happened in the past. But God can still work through that and show truth through those icons.
Thank you.
Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Mary Kate. As many of you are aware, AI systems have kind of exploded in the last couple of months. I'm curious, especially if some of your peers next year go to college and they have a professor or a classmate who makes the claim that these AI tools are generating art and therefore seem to, because they're imitative, seem to have a consciousness or a religious life, even a spiritual life. How would you respond? How ought we to respond to that?
Thank you for your question. I'm not very educated in terms of AI things in general. I don't really know much about that, but just thinking about the definition of art, the first phrase especially, the conscious use of skill and creative imagination. And clearly there's something about AI that it doesn't exist on its own. It has to be programmed by a person, a human, and it can be, I assume it works off of like math equations, and there's zeros and ones, and yeah, I don't.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. There's zeros and ones and math equations, and those things within themselves are art. They're a conscious use of skill and creative imagination to produce something beautiful. But the fact that they generate these images, it doesn't actually